My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I was 42 years old when I discovered that my husband of 15 years had written me out of his will. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in my home office, a room Derek had insisted on designing with the finest mahogany desk and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking our 3-acre property. I remember running my fingers over the smooth, cool surface of that desk as I stared at the document I'd accidentally found while organizing our tax records. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, but my face remained perfectly calm. A skill I'd mastered during my years as a corporate attorney before I gave it all up to support Derek's real estate development company. I had sacrificed my partnership track at one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. I had postponed having children when Derek insisted we needed to focus on building our empire first. I had poured my legal expertise, my connections, and my inheritance from my grandmother into his business, believing his promises that everything we build will be ours together. And there I sat, holding irrefutable proof that ours actually meant his family's. His parents, his siblings, even his cousins were named as beneficiaries, while I, his wife and partner, wasn't mentioned once. What Derek never understood about me was my patience and my ability to plan. That afternoon, as I slid his will back into the folder marked confidential, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. He thought he owned everything. I was about to prove him wrong. Derek and I met during our second year at Harvard Law School. I was at the top of our class, already being courted by the big firms, while Derek struggled to maintain a B average despite his charisma and networking skills. He was the type of person who lit up a room when he entered, strong jawline, confident stride, and an ability to make anyone feel like the most important person in the world when he focused his attention on them. I was the quiet, analytical type who could dissect a legal argument with surgical precision, but froze in networking events. We were opposites, but it worked. I stayed up countless nights helping him prepare for exams, practically wrote his papers for him, and tutored him through complex legal concepts until they clicked. When he graduated with honors, his parents threw an extravagant party at their Beacon Hill home, where he publicly attributed his success to my brilliant Rebecca. On our wedding day, standing beneath an arch of white roses at his family's summer estate in the Hamptons, Derek looked into my eyes and promised, "Everything I build will be ours together, Becca. Every brick, every dollar, every success. It's for us and our future." I believed him completely. When he started his development company 2 years later, I didn't hesitate to give up my position on the partnership track at Morrison & Fletcher. The managing partner called me insane. I was only 2 years away from becoming the youngest female partner in the firm's history. But I saw it as investing in our shared future. We started in a small apartment in Cambridge, with me handling all the legal work for his first projects. As the business grew, so did our lifestyle, from the apartment to a townhouse, then to our current mansion in Wellesley with its 6 bedrooms and indoor pool. But even as our square footage expanded, I noticed Derek's family maintained a certain coldness toward me. His mother would introduce me as Derek's wife, rather than by my name, even after a decade of marriage. His father, a retired judge, would talk around me at family gatherings, directing questions about legal matters to Derek despite knowing my background. I tried everything to win them over, hosting perfect holiday gatherings, remembering every birthday and anniversary, even learning to make his mother's famous apple pie from her closely guarded recipe. Nothing seemed to bridge the gap of me being not from their social circle, as his sister Caroline once whispered to a cousin when she thought I couldn't hear. The first real indication of financial control came 5 years into our marriage, when Derek insisted on giving me an allowance instead of maintaining our joint accounts. "It's just easier for taxes this way, Becca," he explained, kissing my forehead like I was a child. "You don't need to worry about the complicated stuff." This from the man who'd needed me to explain the rule against perpetuities to him 6 times during law school. The day I found the will started like any other. I was organizing our tax documents for our accountant's quarterly review, a task Derek had always left to me since I was so much better with details. Our home office had 2 filing cabinets, one for business, one for personal. I needed our property tax records from the previous year and knew they'd be in the personal cabinet under real estate primary residence. When I pulled that folder, another one came with it, falling open on the floor. Bold letters stamped confidential in red across the cream-colored folder made my curiosity peak. I shouldn't have looked, but I'm glad I did. Inside was Derek's last will and testament, updated just 3 months prior. I still remember the exact phrasing. I, Derek James Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all my property, both real and personal, including but not limited to all real estate holdings, business interests in Thompson Development, Group and its subsidiaries, financial accounts, investments, vehicles, art collections, and personal effects to be divided as follows. What followed was a meticulous breakdown of percentages to his parents, 40%. His brother Michael, 25%, his sister Caroline, 25%, and the remaining 10% divided among 3 cousins who I'd met perhaps twice at family gatherings. My name appeared exactly once in the entire document, in the header identifying Derek as married to Rebecca Ann Thompson. The technical legal language made the exclusion deliberately clear, with a clause explicitly stating that the omission of his spouse was intentional and not due to oversight. My hands began to shake so badly that the papers made a rustling sound like autumn leaves. A wave of nausea hit me, and I had to put my head between my knees to keep from passing out. Once the initial shock subsided, memories flooded in. Derek, at our 10th anniversary dinner, raising a toast, to the woman who makes everything possible. I promise to take care of you forever, Becca. Derek, after his father's heart attack, holding my hand and whispering, life is so fragile. I need to make sure you're always protected if anything happens to me. Lies, all lies. I needed verification before I completely fell apart. With hands still trembling, I called James Burton, our family attorney, using the excuse that I wanted to update my own will to include a donation to my alma mater. While I have you on the phone, James, has Derek made any recent updates to his will that I should coordinate with? The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything before James awkwardly confirmed, yes, he made significant changes about 3 months ago. 3 months ago, right after our anniversary weekend in Napa Valley, where he'd surprised me with diamond earrings and told me I was the best decision he'd ever made. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I researched our state's marital property laws until 3 a.m., discovering that Massachusetts is not a community property state. Without proper legal protections I had neglected because I trusted my husband, I could be entitled to far less than half of what we'd built together. Further digging revealed something even more disturbing. Derek had been systematically structuring our assets through complex holding companies and trusts that would be difficult to untangle in divorce proceedings. The family business I had helped build was legally shielded from me. I wondered if my inability to have children was the reason. We'd tried for 3 years before medical tests revealed my infertility. Derek had seemed supportive at the time, but had he secretly held it against me? Was I just a temporary placeholder until he found someone who could give him heirs for the Thompson legacy? The more I thought about it, the more 15 years of small comments, glances, and family dynamics took on new, sinister meanings. I'd been a fool. For a week, I maintained the perfect wife facade while processing my emotions. Derek never noticed the difference. He was too absorbed in a new development project to see that my smiles no longer reached my eyes or that I'd stopped asking about his day. Every night after he fell asleep, I would slip out of bed and sit in the dark of our home office thinking. On the 7th night, I found myself staring at real estate listings at 2 a.m., not even sure why at first. Then it hit me. I needed to build something of my own, something he couldn't touch. The next day, I called Sarah Chen, my closest friend from law school who had become a financial advisor. Just a casual lunch to catch up, I told Derek when I marked it on our shared calendar. Over salmon salads at a restaurant far from Derek's usual haunts, I confided in Sarah. Her expression shifted from shock to determination as I spoke. First, we need to know what you're working with, she said, sliding into professional mode. I had $47,000 in a savings account Derek didn't know about. birthday checks from my parents I'd never deposited into our joint account, speaking fees, from legal conferences I'd attended over the years, and small inheritances from distant relatives. It wasn't much compared to his millions, but it was mine. Sarah helped me create an LLC under my maiden name, Campbell Properties, to shield my activities. "Real estate is perfect for you," she said. "You already understand the legal complexities, and there's serious money to be made in distressed properties, if you know what you're doing." I remembered the real estate finance class I'd taken in law school, the one where I'd earned the highest grade while Derek had barely passed. That night, I researched emerging neighborhoods in our metropolitan area, focusing on an up-and-coming district that was still affordable but showing signs of gentrification. Within 2 weeks, I had identified my first potential investment, a foreclosed duplex needing renovation. The bank wanted $120,000, but I knew from my research they'd take less. I combined my savings with a private loan from Sarah to make it happen. "I'll go in with you at 8% interest," she offered. "That's better than you'll get anywhere else with no credit history under your maiden name." While Derek was on a 3-day business trip to Chicago, I closed on the property for $98,500. I still remember signing my maiden name, Rebecca Ann Campbell, on the purchase documents, feeling a thrill of independence I hadn't experienced since before my marriage. I knew nothing about renovation, so I taught myself through online videos, forums, and books. I discovered I had a knack for seeing a property's potential beneath peeling paint and outdated fixtures. Finding contractors willing to work with a woman proved challenging at first. I endured mansplaining, inflated quotes, and patronizing attitudes. Eventually, I found a crew led by a contractor named Miguel who respected my vision and my budget. To explain my frequent absences to Derek, I created elaborate cover stories about volunteer work and fitness classes. "I've joined this amazing women's empowerment organization," I told him over dinner one night. He nodded absently, more focused on his phone than my words. "That's nice, honey. You should have hobbies." 4 months later, with the duplex renovated and both units rented at above-market rates, I had my first taste of positive cash flow, $200 a month that went straight into Campbell Properties' business account. It wasn't much compared to what Derek made, but it was entirely mine, and he had no idea it existed. My first success with the duplex gave me both confidence and capital. After 6 months of steady rental income, I refinanced the property based on its new appraised value and pulled out enough equity to make a down payment on a small 4-unit apartment building 3 miles away. Around the same time, Derek casually mentioned over breakfast that he'd invested $200,000 in his brother Michael's tech startup. "It's going to be huge," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Michael's team has this revolutionary algorithm." What struck me wasn't the investment itself, but that he hadn't consulted me before making it. More evidence of his separate vision of our finances. When I suggested we should discuss our retirement planning together, Derek waved his hand dismissively. "I'll handle it, Becca. That's what I do." At an estate auction the following month, I met Maria Rodriguez, a seasoned real estate investor who took an interest in my careful property analysis. "You've got good instincts," she told me after watching me walk through a property, pointing out issues the listing had conveniently omitted. Maria became both mentor and friend, teaching me strategies that weren't in any online course. Meanwhile, at a Thompson family dinner, Derek's sister Caroline made a pointed comment that sent chills down my spine. "It's so important that family assets stay in the family. Don't you think, Rebecca?" The look she gave me made it clear what, or rather who, wasn't considered family. With Maria's guidance, I began to shift my strategy toward commercial properties, starting with a small retail space that I renovated and leased to a local artisan bakery at a healthy profit. At a dinner party with Derek's business associates, I casually mentioned a potential opportunity zone in the western part of the city. Derek immediately presented it as his own insight to his colleagues without acknowledging my contribution. "I've been watching that area for months," he said, as I sipped my wine in silence. My growing real estate activities became increasingly difficult to conceal. One night during our anniversary dinner, a contractor called about an emergency plumbing issue at the apartment building. I excused myself to the restroom to take the call, heart pounding as I whispered instructions while checking under bathroom stalls to ensure I was alone. With each property acquisition, my confidence grew alongside my knowledge. My portfolio hit six figures while Derek remained completely oblivious, too self-absorbed to question why his formerly career-focused wife seemed content with charity work and yoga classes. I started volunteering at a women's shelter one afternoon a week, partly as cover, but also because it gave me perspective. Many of the women there had fled financial abuse, and their stories reinforced my determination to establish independence. Through Maria, I connected with a network of female investors who supported each other with advice, referrals, and occasionally co-investment opportunities. When I suggested to Derek that we put my name on the deed to our recently purchased vacation home in Cape Cod, he laughed and said, "The paperwork is such a hassle, and it doesn't really matter anyway since we're married." But it did matter, as I now knew all too well. 2 years into my secret venture, I focused on portfolio diversification, adding a small warehouse, more residential units in various neighborhoods, and even a partial interest in a strip mall through a syndication deal Maria organized. I created increasingly complex legal structures to protect my growing assets. Multiple LLCs, a trust, and carefully documented separate property agreements that would stand up to scrutiny if ever challenged. Derek began questioning my new friendships, particularly my relationship with those real estate women, as he called Maria and my investor network. "You spend a lot of time with them," he observed over dinner one evening, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "What do you all talk about for so many hours?" I shrugged and said, "Oh, just normal stuff. Kids, travel, community projects." The lie came easily now. While organizing our safe deposit box for our annual insurance review, I discovered Derek had a second box at the same bank that I knew nothing about. The bank associate mentioned it casually. "Will you be reviewing box 247 as well, Mrs. Thompson?" When I asked Derek about it later, he dismissed my question with practiced ease. "Just some old family documents my father asked me to keep." Nothing. Interesting. The day my portfolio value reached $500,000 was the same day Derek laughed at me when I tried to discuss real estate market trends at dinner. "Honey, these are complicated economic factors," he said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Stick to your charity work. You're so good at that." I nodded and smiled while mentally calculating the cap rate on the commercial property I was scheduled to close on the following week. I received an invitation to speak at a female investors conference about creative financing strategies, an honor that I had to decline to maintain my secret. The hardest part was not sharing my accomplishments with anyone except Sarah and Maria. When a major tenant threatened to leave my retail space unless I reduced their rent, I negotiated a creative solution involving a percentage-based rent tied to their sales performance. A win-win that actually increased my income when their business subsequently boomed. Derek forgot our anniversary entirely that year, sending a generic text at 9 p.m. with, "Sorry, swamped with the Riverside project. We'll make it up to you this weekend." I spent that anniversary day closing on my largest acquisition yet, a 12-unit apartment building with value-add potential that I purchased 20% below market value. During a weekend meditation retreat, which was real, though primarily serving as cover for my absence, I experienced a moment of profound self-doubt. Was I becoming just as deceitful as Derek? But then I remembered the will, the separate safety deposit box, and years of financial exclusion, and my resolve strengthened. The emotional distance in our marriage grew in proportion to my rising confidence. Derek worked increasingly long hours and often came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, which he attributed to meeting clients. I established solid relationships with several regional banks as my credit profile under my maiden name grew stronger. One afternoon, I experienced a terrifying close call when I literally ran into Derek's colleague James while showing a potential tenant through my retail property. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" he asked, clearly confused. "Oh, just helping out a friend who owns this building," I explained smoothly. "She's out of town and asked me to meet with some prospects." James looked doubtful but didn't press further. That night, I lay awake wondering how much longer I could maintain my double life and whether I even wanted to. 3 years into my secret real estate career, disaster struck when a major water main break flooded the basement and first floor of my apartment complex, causing extensive damage. Insurance would cover most of it, but I needed $30,000 immediately for emergency repairs before the claims process could be completed. With Derek scrutinizing our joint accounts for his new hotel development project, I couldn't risk withdrawing such a large sum. Instead, I leveraged my network, securing short-term loans from 3 fellow investors who trusted my track record. Miguel and his crew worked around the clock to mitigate the damage, and I spent several nights sleeping only 3 hours, taking calls from displaced tenants while maintaining my perfect wife persona during the day. The crisis ultimately strengthened my business as I implemented better property management systems and emergency protocols. Shortly after resolving the flood situation, my portfolio crossed the $1 million valuation mark. I was officially a millionaire in secret. I celebrated alone in my car, parked overlooking the city skyline, with a single cupcake and a profound sense of pride mixed with loneliness. 2 weeks later, Derek collapsed at work from what turned out to be extreme exhaustion and dangerously high blood pressure, requiring a 3-day hospital stay. Sitting beside his bed, watching him sleep with monitors beeping around us, I briefly reconsidered my plan. Was I being too harsh, too calculating? But when he recovered, nothing changed. In fact, his first week back at work, he implemented new measures to track my spending and questioned a $200 donation I'd made to a women's business initiative. An unexpected opportunity arose when I learned about a foreclosed small office building near the University District, available at 40% below market value due to the previous owner's tax problems. The property required all my available liquid capital plus a significant bank loan, a calculated risk that would either accelerate my portfolio growth or create dangerous cash flow problems if it failed. I spent 2 weeks analyzing every aspect of the investment, creating detailed projections and contingency plans. "You seem distracted," Derek commented one evening. "Is your women's group planning another fundraiser?" I smiled and nodded while mentally reviewing tenant improvement allowance calculations. The risk paid off spectacularly when I secured 3 professional tenants, a law firm, an accounting practice, and a tech startup within 60 days. All signing 5-year leases at premium rates. The property immediately became the cornerstone of my portfolio, generating substantial positive cash flow. That same month, Derek announced he had invested our joint savings in a new resort development venture without consulting me. "It's going to double our money in 18 months, he said excitedly over dinner. I nodded supportively while wondering how I would have reacted years ago, before I had my own financial security. Using a portion of my growing proceeds, I anonymously established a small scholarship program for women pursuing real estate education, named after my grandmother, who had always encouraged my independence. Meanwhile, I focused on learning advanced tax strategies to maximize my portfolio efficiency, often staying up late studying IRS codes and regulations after Derek went to bed. Over time, I developed a renovation formula that consistently increased property values well above the invested capital, creating a reputation among local brokers who began bringing off-market deals directly to Ms. Campbell. I received an unexpected call from a regional development company interested in partnering on larger projects. "Your portfolio performance has caught our attention," the development director said. I regretfully declined, knowing such a partnership would be impossible to hide. Later that week, while searching for our insurance documents, I accidentally discovered statements for an account I didn't recognize. Derek had been hiding significant bonuses in a separate account for over 2 years. In our 15th year of marriage, I began noticing subtle changes in Derek's appearance and behavior. New designer clothes, a gym membership he actually used, late-night texts that he shielded from my view, and a sudden interest in his skincare routine. I might have been wrapped up in my real estate empire, but I wasn't blind. The confirmation came in the form of a receipt from Tiffany & Co. for a platinum bracelet that never made its way to my jewelry box. Still, I needed certainty before making any decisions. After careful consideration, I hired a private investigator, a woman recommended through a divorce attorney in my real estate network. "Just be prepared for what I might find," she warned during our discreet meeting at a cafe 30 miles from our home. 2 weeks later, she delivered a folder containing photos, hotel receipts, and restaurant bills documenting Derek's 6-month affair with Megan, a 28-year-old financial analyst at his firm. The most painful discovery wasn't the affair itself, but learning he'd taken her to our favorite restaurant in Provincetown, the place where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. Even worse, he'd used our joint account to fund jewelry, weekend getaways, and even a down payment on a luxury condo where they met twice weekly. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. After the investigator left, I sat in my car for hours, finally allowing myself to break down completely. The tears came in violent waves as 15 years of suppressed hurt, betrayal, and rage poured out. A security guard eventually knocked on my window, concerned by the sobbing. Woman in the parking garage. I pulled myself together enough to drive to Sarah's house, where I spent the night curled up in her guest room. The next morning, I called a therapist specializing in infidelity trauma and booked an emergency session. The therapy became my lifeline. Over the following weeks, as I processed not only Derek's betrayal, but also my own years of secrecy. The difference, my therapist pointed out, is that your actions were protective, not destructive to the relationship. You didn't take vows to financially merge with your husband. He, however, explicitly vowed fidelity. As I worked through my emotional turmoil, a market downturn threatened portions of my portfolio, particularly my retail properties as consumer spending declined. I spent many late nights developing creative refinancing strategies to protect my assets during the economic uncertainty. Sarah warned me about rumors that Derek's company was facing potential SEC scrutiny over accounting irregularities in their recent projects. Be careful, Rebecca. If there's an investigation, your assets could be at risk by association, even though they're separate. Derek's behavior grew increasingly erratic. One evening, he suddenly asked about my personal savings. Do you still have that account from before we were married? How much is in there now? When I deflected, he pressed harder. We should pool our resources. I have some temporary cash flow issues with the new development. I consulted with a divorcee attorney to understand my options, learning that my carefully structured separate property would likely be protected in a divorce, but that timing and documentation would be crucial. I stabilized my portfolio through strategic management during the downturn, cutting unnecessary expenses, negotiating with lenders, and even selling one underperforming property to shore up cash reserves. While other investors panicked and sold at losses, I selectively acquired new properties at discounted prices, following the old adage of buying when others were selling. Derek's business problems became increasingly apparent as he began bringing work stress home, snapping at small issues, and making bitter comments about fair-weather investors. He started asking more pointed questions about my activities and where all your time goes, making me realize that my window for action was narrowing. One night, after he'd been drinking, he admitted his company was facing some temporary setbacks and suggested I ask my parents for a loan. I maintained my supportive wife role while accelerating my preparations for what I now saw as an inevitable confrontation. The facade finally collapsed on a rainy Tuesday when the Boston Business Journal published an exposé on financial irregularities at Thompson Development Group, sending Derek's company stock plummeting 60% in a single day. I was preparing dinner when Derek stormed into the house, soaking wet and wild-eyed. "It's a hit job," he shouted, throwing his keys across the kitchen. "They've been out to get me for years." I listened quietly as he ranted about jealous competitors and disloyal employees, all while checking his phone obsessively as messages poured in. The next morning, creditors began freezing company accounts, and investors demanded emergency meetings. Derek's carefully constructed business empire was unraveling rapidly. After 3 days of watching him spiral between rage and panic, he approached me with what he clearly thought was a reasonable request. "Becca, I need you to liquidate your retirement account," he said, attempting to sound calm, though I could see the desperation in his eyes. "Just temporarily. I can replace it in 6 months with interest." I asked how much he needed. "All of it," he replied without hesitation. "About 400,000, right?" The amount was laughable compared to what I actually controlled, but He had no way of knowing that? Let me think about it, I replied, knowing the moment of truth was approaching. That evening, I prepared myself mentally and emotionally for what would come next. I chose my outfit carefully, the charcoal gray suit I'd worn as a corporate attorney, not the softer, feminine clothes I'd adopted during my years as Derek's wife. When he returned home, I was waiting in his home office, sitting behind his desk with a glass of his expensive scotch. "We need to talk," I said as he entered. The confrontation began calmly enough. I slid a copy of his will across the desk. Not the original I'd found, but a legally obtained copy from our attorney's office. "Would you like to explain this?" Derek's shock quickly turned to defensive anger. "You had no right to go through my private papers," he snapped, avoiding the actual question. "How I structure my estate is my business." I remained perfectly composed, the way I used to before cross-examining a hostile witness. "Is that so? After 15 years of marriage, after I gave up my career to help build your company, after I've supported you through everything, your business remains solely your business?" Derek's justifications came in predictable waves. First claiming it was just a draft, then suggesting his family legacy needed protection, finally admitting he'd never updated it after we married. My parents are traditional, Becca. They insisted on certain provisions. When those excuses gained no traction, he pivoted to manipulation. "I never thought it would matter because I plan to live a long life with you. Don't you trust me?" When I remained unmoved, his anger resurfaced. "What does it matter anyway? Everything I have will be gone after this mess. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" That's when I revealed the first card in my hand. "Actually, Derek, not everything will be gone. I've built something of my own while you were busy excluding me from our supposed partnership." I opened my laptop and pulled up my portfolio summary, showing only about 30% of my actual holdings, but enough to shock him into silence. "What is this? Campbell Properties? Your maiden name? How long have you been hiding this?" His face contorted, with the special outrage of a controlling man discovering he hasn't been in control after all. When he regained his composure, he attempted to claim rights to my properties. "This is marital property. Half of it belongs to me regardless of what name you put on the paperwork." I was prepared for this. I presented him with the meticulously maintained legal documentation that protected my assets. The LLC formation predating any property purchases, the loans in my name only, the separate bank accounts never commingled with marital funds, and most importantly, the source of initial capital coming solely from my premarital savings and inheritances. His face fell as the reality set in. "You've been planning this for years. While I trusted you, you were undermining me." The irony of his statement hung in the air between us. Derek cycled through threats. "I'll ruin you in court," pleading, "We can fix this together like we've always done," and even attempted reconciliation. I never meant to hurt you. I let him exhaust all avenues before delivering my terms. "Here's what's going to happen, Derek. We're getting divorced. I'll agree to a clean, quick separation that won't attract further attention to your business problems. I'll even sign NDAs about what I know regarding your company's practices. In exchange, you'll agree to my proposed settlement without contest." I slid another document across the desk, a separation agreement my attorney had prepared. Finally, after years of suppressed emotions, I spoke my truth. "You never saw me as a partner, Derek. I was an accessory, a useful tool for your ambitions, but never your equal. You excluded me from financial decisions while benefiting from my expertise. You hid assets while I helped build your company. You wrote me out of your will while telling me you'd always take care of me. And finally, you betrayed our vows while I remained faithful despite everything. I deserved better. And now I've built it for myself." I stood, gathered my papers, and walked toward the door. "I've moved my things to my own place. My attorney will contact yours tomorrow. Goodbye, Derek." As I left the house we'd shared for a decade, I felt a profound sense of both grief and liberation. I drove directly to my recently purchased luxury condo in a secure building downtown, a property Derek had never seen and would never enter. The divorce proceedings moved surprisingly quickly. Derek's family attempted to contest the settlement, terrified at the prospect of an outsider walking away with any Thompson assets. Their shock at discovering my financial acumen provided a small but satisfying vindication after years of their thinly veiled contempt. Derek's company eventually filed for bankruptcy protection, but my careful legal separation of our assets before the public downfall protected my holdings. Throughout the economic challenges that affected the broader market, my diversified portfolio continued to grow, slower than during the boom years, but steadily and sustainably. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. I continued therapy sessions, joined support groups for divorced women, and gradually rebuilt the non-financial aspects of my life that had withered during my marriage. I reconnected with old friends from law school and my brief legal career, many of whom expressed both sympathy for my situation and admiration for my resilience. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome was expanding my anonymous scholarship into a proper foundation, providing both funding and mentorship to women seeking financial independence after leaving difficult relationships. I named it Phoenix Foundation, a nod to rising from the ashes of my marriage, but also vague enough to protect my privacy. My personal experience had shown me how financial dependency creates vulnerability, and I was determined to help others avoid that trap. For the first year post-divorce, I focused primarily on stabilizing my business interests and emotional health. I sold properties that required too much active management and reinvested in more passive options like triple net retail and office buildings with stable, long-term tenants. This shift gave me time to rediscover my own interests and passions. Beyond just financial security and independence, I took up painting again, a hobby abandoned in college, and started traveling solo to places Derek had never been interested in visiting. Along the way, I developed a philosophy about forgiveness that surprised those who knew my story. Forgiveness isn't about absolving wrongs, I would explain when asked how I could seem so at peace. It's about releasing the anger so it doesn't consume you. Derek will always be responsible for his choices, but I choose not to let those choices define my future. 3 years after our divorce, I unexpectedly encountered Derek at a charity gala in Boston. He had aged noticeably, stress lines around his eyes, gray hair at his temples. He was there with his parents, their influence apparently having sustained him through his business collapse. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment I braced for the rush of anger or hurt I would have expected. Instead, I felt nothing but a calm recognition of a person from my past who no longer held any power over my emotions. I nodded politely and turned back to my conversation, leaving him to wonder at my transformation. In time, I developed new relationships based on transparency and equality. I was upfront about my financial situation with potential partners, not flaunting my success, but making it clear I valued honesty above all else. Some men were intimidated, others intrigued, for the wrong reasons, but eventually I found connections with people who appreciated my journey and shared similar values. The real fortune I built wasn't measured in property values or portfolio returns. It was the unshakable confidence that came from creating security on my own terms. No one could ever again make me feel small, dependent, or unworthy of full partnership. What began as a desperate act of self-preservation evolved into genuine empowerment that extended beyond me to the women I now mentored through the foundation. In a surprising turn of events, I eventually returned to practicing law part-time, specializing in helping women understand their financial rights in marriage and divorce. My story, shared carefully and selectively, gave clients hope that they too could rebuild after betrayal. As for what comes next, I remain open to life's possibilities while standing firmly on the foundation I've built. To me, family legacy isn't about bloodlines or inherited wealth. It's about the values we choose to embody and the positive impact we leave on others. Have you ever found yourself at a crossroads where you had to choose between security and self-respect? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful transformations. If my journey resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power and build something meaningful for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. May you Always know your worth and have the courage to create the life you deserve.